Today, we're digging into something that sounds nerdy, but has a huge impact on performance: smart text scaling in multi-size banner campaigns. If your headlines look great in a 300 by 250, but turn into unreadable ants in a 320 by 50, you're leaving money on the table. So let's fix that.
Exactly. Multi-size banners live or die on legibility. And with responsive ads now the default on networks like Google, you can't design for just one size anymore. The whole idea is to build a system so your text scales intelligently across formats, instead of manually nudging fonts in dozens of files.
So before anyone starts setting rules or tinkering in a tool, what needs to be in place?
You need 4 basics: a master creative that defines your layout, your brand typography specs, a clear content hierarchy, and a banner generator or HTML5 system that can actually apply rules. Think tools like Viewst, Google Web Designer, or a custom HTML5 setup. They're the engines that translate your rules into consistent output.
You mentioned hierarchy, and that feels like the foundation here, right?
It is. You start by mapping every piece of copy into tiers: primary headline as tier 1, secondary line as tier 2, body copy as tier 3, and CTA as tier 4. Once each element knows its tier, you can give each tier a base font size on a reference banner, like a 300 by 250 or 728 by 90, and keep consistent ratios between them.
Walk me through that base setup. What does it look like in practical numbers?
On your master, you might set your H1 around 26 to 30 pixels, H2 around 18 to 22, body at 14 to 16, and CTA at 16 to 18, often with a bolder treatment. The key is keeping a predictable ratio. For example, H1 always about 1.4 times H2. So when tools like Viewst's Smart Resize or Google Web Designer scale, they preserve your visual hierarchy.
Once that master is dialed in, you're still dealing with a bunch of different sizes, from leaderboards to skinny mobile bars. How do you keep all those in check without custom rules for every single dimension?
You group formats by aspect ratio: wide horizontals like 728 by 90 and 970 by 250 in one bucket, standard rectangles like 300 by 600, and tiny mobile units like 320 by 600 in their own group. Then you define scaling factors per group relative to the master. So, say horizontals might bump headline size up a bit, while verticals dial it slightly down to avoid awkward wrapping.
Can you give a concrete example of those scaling differences?
Sure. Your standard rectangle, the master, runs at 100% for all tiers, while wide horizontals might push H1 to 110, 120%, and keep body around 90, 100%, because you've got width but less height. Vertical units might bring everything to around 90 to 100% to keep lines short. And for small mobile banners, you often shrink the headline to about 85, 90% and drop body copy altogether, keeping the CTA strong.
So that's the scaling logic. But there's also the question of legibility thresholds. You don't want automation shrinking text into oblivion.
Exactly. That's where min and max font sizes per tier come in. You set a floor and ceiling so the system can't go below legible sizes or balloon text in huge formats. For desktop banners, you might keep headlines between 18 and 42 pixels, body between 12 and 20, and CTAs between 14 and 26. Then adjust those ranges down slightly for small mobile units.
And those thresholds aren't just nice to have. They're tied into accessibility and quick scan behavior too, right?
Right. Guidance from groups like W3C and NN Group urges default sizes that are comfortably readable and can scale up without breaking layouts, which is especially critical when users only give your ad 2 to 5 seconds. If your minimums are too low, your automation might technically fit the text, but real people can't read it in those few seconds.
How do you actually enforce those min and max values inside tools, rather than just on a spec sheet?
In Viewst, you'd lock min and max sizes into brandbook text styles, so Smart Resize respects them. In Google Web Designer, you'd use attributes like gwd-min-font-size-px and set them higher than the default 10 pixels. In custom HTML5, you can use CSS clamp to define a minimum, preferred, and maximum size in one line and avoid any scripts that shrink below your thresholds.
Now, even with smart scaling and thresholds, you're going to run into overflow issues, text that just doesn't fit a given box. How do you decide what happens when copy wants more space than the banner has?
You set different overflow policies by tier. Headlines might shrink down to their minimum and then wrap to a second line, while subheads shrink and then truncate with an ellipsis once they hit the floor. Body copy can be truncated aggressively, pushing details to the landing page, whereas CTAs should never be truncated. If they don't fit, you rewrite the copy.
So that's the policy. What about the mechanics? How do tools handle the text in containers?
Most tools treat text as being inside a bounding box, so you configure fit modes like shrink to fit or overflow hidden, line height, max number of lines, and alignment per tier. The logic is typically something like, if text height exceeds the container, reduce the font size down to the minimum, and if it still doesn't fit, apply your truncation or wrapping rule.
Let's talk implementation, starting with Viewst, since the article leans on it as an example.
In Viewst, you create a master banner that encodes your hierarchy and typography tiers, then apply brandbook styles with locked min and max sizes for H1, H2, body, and CTA. From there, AI Smart Resize spins out all the sizes, and you configure text behavior layer by layer, then save the whole setup as a template so future campaigns inherit the same rules.
And for teams living in Google Web Designer already, how do they translate all this into that environment?
They'd label text elements with classes like .bannerh1 or .bannercta, set GWD min font size px per class, and then use responsive layouts or media rules to adjust font sizes by format group. Text fitting modes like reduce text to fit do the scaling work, and the built-in responsive preview lets you quickly check how everything behaves across sizes.
If someone's building their own HTML5 banners from scratch, they've got a bit more freedom, but also more responsibility. What does a good custom setup look like?
You define CSS variables for each tier's base size, adjust those via media queries for your size groups, and use clamp to keep them within min and max limits. On top of that, you might add a small text measurement script to detect overflow and apply classes that either truncate or wrap, all while keeping the code lightweight enough to meet ad server bundle limits.
All this logic is great, but ads don't run in a vacuum. They run on real pages and devices. How important is testing in actual placements before launch?
It's critical, because viewers give promotional content only a few seconds. If your headline is tiny, clipped, or misaligned in a real environment, those seconds vanish. You want a preview on desktop, tablet, and mobile in different orientations and in contexts like news sites or apps to check contrast and alignment.
What does a simple, repeatable testing checklist look like for a team?
Start by using your production tool's preview mode to cycle through all sizes and ask, is the H1 readable at arm's length? Is the CTA fully visible? Is anything wrapping oddly? Then move to real devices using features like DV360's QR previews, load test pages that resemble your top publishers, log any issues as violations of your rules, and fix those rules rather than hacking individual banners.
So you've dialed in your rules, you've tested them. The last step seems to be making sure the whole team actually follows them. How do you operationalize smart text scaling so it's not just one designer's secret sauce?
You document everything. Tier definitions, base sizes, scaling factors, min and max thresholds, overflow policies, and the testing checklist, so it becomes a standard, not tribal knowledge. Then you bake those rules into templates and brand books, lock what needs to be locked, and keep collaboration inside the production platform so feedback aligns with the system instead of fighting it.
To wrap this up, if someone remembers only one thing about smart text scaling for multi-size banners, what should it be?
Treat your master creative and its text rules as infrastructure. Once you encode hierarchy, scaling, thresholds, and overflow behavior properly, every new size becomes a push-button output instead of a manual chore.
That's a great note to end on. Smart text scaling isn't just about prettier banners. It's about freeing your team from repetitive resizing so they can focus on better ideas. Thanks for listening. And if your headlines are still unreadable in those tiny mobile units, you now know exactly where to start fixing it.